Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. I know more people are joining, but we'll let them come in as they do here. So we're really happy to have Dick Keyes with us again. He, for those who were here last year, he gave a great talk that I still sometimes will go back and look at those notes from the talk. So just to give a little bit of introduction here, Dick did his undergraduate work at Harvard. And then he went on to do his M.Div from Westminster Theological Seminary, which is in Philadelphia. And he's the director of the L'Abri Fellowship in Southborough, Massachusetts. Some of you know the name Francis Schaeffer, who's the original founder of the L'Abri communities, which I hope we can hear a little bit more about. And he's taught at Gordon-Conwell over the years and has written several books, one of which is actually on cynicism, which is our topic for today. So I'm really excited to hear this talk, and I'm going to hand it over now to him. And then James Zhu at the end will be moderating a time of Q&A. So if you have any questions during the talk, feel free to just put them in the chat window on the side, and then James will aggregate those and ask those of our speaker at the end. So welcome everyone, and Dick, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I wasn't sure what to talk about because Finney asked me to do something on apologetics. I thought of doing something on the election because there's all sorts of apologetic issues that could come up there. And then I thought, well, maybe you've had enough of the election for a while, and I'll be coming at the election with only a glancing blow this morning. Because I want to talk about cynicism and honesty. I remember years ago, Vinny just mentioned L'Abri Fellowship. It's a study community. Started in Switzerland. It's mainly in Europe, but it's also in Southborough, Massachusetts, about 20 miles or 25 miles west of Boston. But people come and study with us about anything they want to study to do with the Christian faith. And I was washing dishes one evening after supper with a whole group of students, and this woman who was an artist from Seattle was washing dishes with me, and she just asked me, how can you try to keep track of what's going on in the world, listen to the news, read up on the current of the news, and still not become a cynic? And my answer to her was so weak that it impressed neither of us. And I thought, this needs some work. So I began to do some work on it and found out that there's been relatively little work on it, particularly work questioning it and asking critical questions about it. So that's the inception of this. I ended up, as Finney said, writing a book about it called Seeing Through Cynicism. But let me start out here, jump in and define what I mean by cynicism. It's not just pessimism. Pessimism is what we call Murphy's Law, that anything that could go wrong will go wrong. In other words, you will get rain on your picnic every time, and without fail. Cynicism is a more narrowly focused pessimism. It's in the confidence that you can see through appearances to the uncomplimentary things underneath those surfaces, those outward appearances. Underneath, what you see is hypocrisy, greed, selfishness, emptiness, power, lust, a desire for glory, and so on. So it's an unmasking of externals that are all very respectable and upright and nice. So cynicism is a kind of lens of suspicion through which we see either parts of the world or the whole world. I think we deal with the problem of suspicion all the time. If someone who you don't know very well, let's say, pays you a compliment, they say they really like what you did, they like what you said, they like what you wrote, they like the way you look, whatever. You have a few seconds to decide, is this sincere? Or is someone putting me on? Am I going to be the butt of a joke in about 15 seconds? Or are they trying to sell me something? Are they trying to sell me life insurance or financial services or Tupperware or they want to get a higher grade from me in a course that I teach. So all this, you just have a few seconds to decide, how do I read this compliment? I mention this because just to illustrate to you that you have a lot of experience decoding relationships to understand what you're getting from other people. Are they trustworthy? Do we trust their honesty, faith, love, or whatever, or not? And what I'm saying is that suspicion is necessary. You need suspicion. We all need suspicion for survival in a bent and broken world. Without suspicion, retail advertising would bankrupt us before Christmas. And so we need it. But what are the boundaries of cynicism as an expression of suspicion? Even Jesus instructed us to be suspicious. Every time Jesus said, beware of, whatever it was, he was telling you to be suspicious of that thing. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, or whatever it is. So suspicion itself is an entirely legitimate and necessary human function and skill. But cynicism is overconfident suspicion. Cynicism is suspicion without a check on it. Cynicism is suspicion that's allowed to go the full distance, that isn't, it doesn't have limitations. So that's how I'm defining it. Let me quickly say how it comes to us. It's not a formal school of philosophy. It's not a worldview, nor is it a social theory. It comes in too many ways to be put in any of those boxes, although it can work in any of those boxes. It can come as a mood and of sort of a suspicion in your ear. It can, or in sort of a trivial thing in a moment, it blows in and blows out. Or it can be a strategy for survival, for someone who feels they've been betrayed too many times. And so it's part of their normal way of functioning with people. It's part of their relatedness to people. It can come from a negative view of human nature philosophically, or it can come from just hanging out with friends who have a cynical sense of humor. Cynicism is promiscuous. It can cohabit with any worldview, religion, way of thinking. In its light form, it can come with low blood sugar and be chased away by a cup of coffee. In a much stronger form, it can be a pattern of life that leads you to bitterness and isolation as a lifelong project. So I'm just trying to lay out the breadth of what we're dealing with here and the ways it can come to us. Now, I want to give you an outline, which is, it's always nice to know that a speaker has a plan. The first part I'll be talking about is there are three theaters of cynicism, which are important to distinguish. Secondly, cynicism and honesty. How does cynicism match with honesty? And thirdly, a Christian response or perspective. Starting out with the three theaters of cynicism. I was very confused about cynicism as I began to investigate it, until I began to be able to separate these theaters from each other. One, it can be cynicism about other people. That's sort of classical cynicism. Two, but you can have cynicism about the institutions of society. Or three, we can be cynical about God and ultimate truth, or even claims for ultimate truth. Cynicism can be separate in any one of those and not in others. This is very important because people can be cynical, say, about other people. So say Karl Marx was very cynical about individuals. Their only motivation is economic self-interest. Totally cynical about God because God was an illusion, but naively uncynical, unsuspicious about the state as an institution of society and all the hope that he could put in the redeeming power of the state. It's necessary to separate out where does your cynicism live, or where is it moving on you. So I want to go through those three categories now: other people, institutions, and God, to know sort of the scope and range of cynicism that surrounds us in the world today. The classical form is cynicism about other people. Good example in Ecclesiastes, an expected place that you might find it. Chapter 4, verse 4, I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from man's envy of his neighbor. Here the preacher claims to be able to see through the appearances of everybody's hard work, diligence, creativity in work, and so on, to see the ultimate motivation behind it all is envy, is climbing some sort of status ladder. What makes it cynicism is a little word all. Anybody can see that some people, some of the time, in some of their work, do that for envy, because of envy. But this is all people in all their work all the time. And that becomes a cynical statement, because cynicism is a totalizing way of seeing and thinking. The cynic feels more sophisticated than other people, more sophisticated than the herd of humanity, because he or she has the equipment to see through what other people can't see through. I'll give you, this is going back a few presidencies, a Doonesbury cartoon about Bill Clinton in the midst of some of his woes. You're not missing anything to not have the visual here. It's just the White House with different sound balloons coming out of the roof of the White House. So how do the numbers look this week, people? Holding steady, sir. Watergate, Whitewater, Paula Jones, Travelgate, none of it is sticking to you. It seems the nation's finally growing up. It turns out that character doesn't count as much as performance. It's about results now. There's a new pragmatism here. I don't know. Is it pragmatism or is it cynicism? Oh, it's definitely not cynicism, sir. For it to be cynicism, the American public would have to believe that all politicians possess your particular character flaws. Clearly, that's not the case. Oh, well, good. I'd hate for it to be cynicism. No way, sir. People understand that you're one of a kind. Now, you notice I read this because I want you to notice that the thing that distinguishes cynicism is the word all politicians. It would be cynical if all politicians possess your particular character flaws. This is because the cynic feels capable of, has a confidence in having a sort of an X-ray machine available to them to see through people and see through them all. Second category here is cynicism about the institutions of society. This is a very powerful thing, I think, in our time, especially since the 1960s, where other kinds of cynicism have been around for a long time. This has gripped America, I think, in a relatively fresh way from the 1960s on. The institutions of society claim to be able to serve us, protect us, to serve the common good, to support our lives. The cynic sees through them and says, oh no, they don't deserve the respect that they get. They are corrupt. They function for the benefit of the few people running them and their friends and family. If you listen, you can hear voices of cynicism about every institution. If you listen carefully, every institution, there's somebody saying only in it for the money, only in it for power, only in it for what they can get out of it themselves. Again, I remember for the last 20 years, I've heard the term the delegitimization of institutions as one of the phenomena we're dealing with in America. That's what I'm talking about. It becomes delegitimized in your own mind. And we could just go through the standard things. Government is certainly the object of much cynical attack. Electoral politics claim to be run by just a charade run by lobbyists on K Street in Washington, or cliches that abound. Politics is about lying, or Washington is Hollywood for ugly people, or you can think of Harry Truman's line, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. And things like this are just all over the place in our public attitudes towards toward government. I'm intrigued, just a footnote here, that the voter turnout in this last election, I think, shows something of the fact that people don't want to join that cynicism about democracy. And so it turned out this amazing count, and the diligence of people going to work counting all this stuff as a tribute to say to that there's been a cynical attack on democracy, and people say we want to do what we can to show this isn't the case. Moving on. Deep cynicism about marriage and family. I can't begin to evaluate this because it's so wide-ranging. But I'll just quote one statement of one man who's just recently been divorced, and he says this one sentence. This states his plan as to how to have a happier future. This is immediately after his divorce. Instead of getting married again, I'm going to find a woman I don't like and buy her a house. You can think about that for a while. Going on the church, none of you would have to guess to come up with grievances about the church, cynical grievances about the church. I won't even enumerate them, but just to warn us that we start with the highest moral principles of faith and life that you can have, that are available anywhere. So it should not surprise us that we present an enormous target for cynical deconstruction of anybody who wants to get at us. We are a target, and we're vulnerable to those charges. But also, that should be a challenge to us, those of us who are Christians, to not live out that cynicism, but really be able to challenge back against it. Education. This is having to do more with higher education. The cynicism in education from within and from without. President from one of the past presidents of the University of Chicago said this, you may have heard this, it's gotten around fairly well. The university is not a university at all, but a multiversity united only by a central heating system. Or the head of one of the branches of the University of California referred to his faculty as quote, a group of intellectual entrepreneurs bound together by common grievances over parking. Now, there's plenty of rocks to throw about any institution, plenty of rocks to throw, and some of them strike their target very well. What institution is free from corruption, free from flaws in sensitive places? But if we swallow the cynicism whole about institutions in general, it will make us really quite an isolated person, withdrawn from public life, hanging out only with our friends if we have some of them. Third category here on the third theater of cynicism is cynicism about God. We see the same pattern extended to God himself. But with God, there are two angles that's important to distinguish. Many people that we're familiar with or criticism that we're familiar with see through the God who presents himself in the Bible and claim that he does not walk his talk, but he is immoral, indifferent, barbaric, malevolent, or whatever, because there's so much evil in the world. God promises so much about his love, his justice, his holiness. We just can't swallow that. You need to see through that surface and be able to dismiss this God. Camus, for example, put it, God's only excuse is that he doesn't exist. But there's another kind of cynicism, not about God directly, but having to do, which I think is almost more a lively problem for us to deal with today. It's not attacking God himself, but human knowledge and experience of God. I see this in two forms. God is a crutch and God is a smokescreen. There's those who say that God is a crutch to provide consolation for people who are unable to face the coldness of the world, or the bleakness of the world. And he is a wish fulfillment or a compensation for them for their loneliness and disappointment. They just believing in God, even though there is no God, makes them feel better. And that's makes them more able to cope with life. I remember a conversation with a cousin of mine. My wife and I had just graduated from seminary. We didn't know where we were going to go after that, so we were sort of at sea. But I said to her, to my cousin, that is, we're trusting God to guide us where we're going to go. And she looked sort of shocked and crestfallen, and she said, "Oh, I see you need the security from believing something like that." And what she was just seeing through my faith, my desire to trust God, and seeing, oh, this poor guy it doesn't have the courage to really face his own future, but must trust there's a God guiding him somewhere, pulling strings, and thereby dismissing the whole of theology and all that comes that surrounds it. But he needs a crutch, so he uses God as a crutch. Then there are those who say God is a smokescreen for believers to hide behind, who are unable to, or while they pursue their own selfish ambitions. This would be coming from Marx, Nietzsche, and postmodern thinking. The smoke from our religious ideals can blind both perpetrator and victim. It can blind me. My theology, my bringing God into this, can blind me to the degree to which I am an oppressor, and also can blind me to the evil of being oppressed. I can cover it all with theological ideas, which makes me not see what's actually going on with any clarity. So God is under suspicion both in human knowledge and experience of God, as well as God himself. Okay, what do we say about the cynic's claim about honesty? I want to throw out some questions here of cynicism. What happens when you take the suspicion of cynicism and reverse the flow of that cynicism, of that suspicion, and apply it to cynicism itself? In other words, apply suspicion to cynicism, running suspicion backwards, as it were. One of the interesting things is that cynicism has a scorn of unsophisticated people who are naive enough to have confidence in any of these three theaters we've talked about. People naive enough to have confidence about human dignity, integrity, and virtue. Cynical about people who are naive enough to value human institutions and see their potential for good, or to see the goodness of God and the meaningfulness of human life. All those get seen through. But the first question to ask of the cynic is, how in the world does the cynic know enough to see through all these appearances, to see through these surfaces, to know what's actually underneath? In other words, doesn't cynicism itself need a naive and grandiose confidence or self-inflated self-trust to think it has X-ray vision that is accurate enough to see the inner workings of other human minds, to see the potential possibility for good in social institutions, to see the meaningfulness or not of human existence? I always enjoy some of these one-liners from C.S. Lewis, and one here is, "A hard heart is no infallible protection against a soft head." So take the example we started with from Ecclesiastes. How could someone know that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor? How would you know that? If that's what you believe, how would you have gone about knowing that? The statement seems sophisticated. It seems someone who's very, very well read, who's done all they need to do on their PhD, for their dissertation on a subject. But how could you possibly know that? Would you have a worldwide survey? A few million social psychologists polling the planet? Think of the reliability of our polling just prior to the last election, asking a very, very simple question, which is, who are you going to vote for, Biden or Trump? Dead simple. To ask that and to answer that, if you are willing to answer it. But this is answering an enormously more complicated and profound question of what is the nature of your motivation for work. So I'm just trying to cast doubt on how unrealistic someone standing up and announcing this as a truth is, given our lack of omniscience. I guess what I come up with in studying cynicism here is that the cynic really needs near omniscience to warrant the cynical judgment that he or she makes. Needs to know dramatically more than one can know. This is the overbite of cynicism. It could be that cynicism has a naive trust in it, or could it be? I'm asking, that cynicism has a naive trust in its own critical judgment and in the sophistication of its own suspicions. Or to press that a little bit further, to see through the surfaces that it does, the cynic points out unflattering motivations and payoffs that drive the perceptions of other people. What if you reversed the flow there too? What if there are payoffs which make cynicism very attractive, even if it might not be true? In other words, can cynicism be motivated? And I think I hear it does. I'm suggesting cynicism can be motivated by the very things to which it attributes bogus faith in God. Cynicism can be a crutch for human weakness or a smokescreen for human selfishness, just as it uses against belief in God. Cynicism is a crutch. One of the main motivations for cynicism, I find in talking to a lot of cynical people, is to provide consolation of self-protection. Cynicism is a strategy for self-protection, or can be. It saves you from the risk of hope with its danger of disappointment. Cynicism takes you to where you don't have to risk hope. Hope, you see, is a risky and dangerous activity, because if you expect the worst of others, institutions, and God, you're not disappointed. You're spared disappointment because you never hoped in anything in the first place. And you don't have disappointment, at least not directly and not immediately. So it can seem as a real consolation. Cynicism also protects you from the danger of being thought naive and unsophisticated, or worse still, the danger of being thought sentimental, because the cynic also always inhabits the place of an elite and sophisticated source of knowledge. And this gets us more into the smokescreen criticism. Cynicism can be a smokescreen as well. Cynicism can offer a way to think very well of yourself, but be protected from the smoke of seeing your own arrogance and elitism. After all, you are more sophisticated than the herd, the great herd of humanity, which can't see enough to see through all the things that you can see through. You can see much more than others even imagine. As you put others down, you may be put up, at least in your own circle of friends, for your wit and cleverness. I think this is true from the school playground to the barroom to the boardroom to the faculty room. Cynicism offers a seductive attractiveness of elitism, of sophistication, and behind that as a smokescreen, it hides that elitism and arrogance is hidden behind a smokescreen of supposed sophistication and critical judgment. Cynicism can also screen you from seeing the truth about your own apathy. It's because it enables you to justify apathy, in that you can always criticize any movement, project, plan, effort, or suggestion to make the world a better place. The cynic can always see through it in some way. I see unintegrity here. I know some people involved in that movement that I don't trust. I think they have shady economics there. There's no institution that you can't look through and see something with your cynical judgment that means you do not need to be to commit yourself to it. You see only your high rational and moral principles, not your unwillingness to get your hands dirty in an imperfect world. So nothing so far is worthy of your moral effort. And if that's true, then you've justified apathy. So when we reverse the flow of suspicion, we can see that cynicism is vulnerable to its own suspicions. It seems to ask a lot to grant cynicism that immunity. I don't think we should make cynicism immune from its own medicine. Finally, the third section here to look at the Christian response or perspective. I didn't myself grow up in any Christian environment. I never went to church to speak of, not in a Christian church anyway. Growing up, didn't connect with Christianity until really the very end of my time in college and the year afterward. And as I looked at the Christian faith, I was actually drawn to it. One of the things that drew me to it was that the Bible seemed brutally honest about and realistic about human nature and the brokenness of the world. The Bible didn't ask me to put on rose-colored glasses at any point. And being fairly cynical, I liked this. And I was drawn to it. Remember, I met Christians that I respected. I hadn't read the Bible. This was at the L'Abri in Switzerland back in 1964. And I went back to France where I'd been studying, and I read the whole Bible in 3 days and write down everything that I couldn't believe in. But one of the main things that I came away from in that was that, good grief, it has a really brutally honest picture of human beings. They're a bunch of losers all the way through the Bible, from start to finish till you get to Jesus. They're a bunch of people who betrayed each other, who lied, who had weak faith, who believed for a while and then abandoned it, all sorts of things. The Bible is brutally honest about the flaws of the people who make up its narratives until you get to Jesus, and then you get something very different. So there's honesty about the terrible evil in the world and in the human heart, but at the same time, there's also dignity and nobility and meaning in human life, in human existence. Theologically, this is because we're made in God's image, but we're also fallen. And we at L'Abri were always talking about, I guess following Francis Schaeffer, each one of us is a glorious ruin. Each of you who are listening today or watching today is a glorious ruin because we are images of God, and yet we're broken, we're fallen. And any worldview that is true to the way the world is must account for both glory and ruin. Cynicism only accounts for ruin, with no room for dignity, integrity, glory. The problem with cynicism is not that it's not nice, it's that it's not true. You look at the book of Job, and Satan is the arch cynic in the book of Job. Remember, God starts out in chapter 1 saying, look at Job, my servant, he's a righteous man. And Satan says, oh, no, he's not. You don't see him clearly. I can see through all that. You've just lined his pockets. You've given him all sorts of stuff. You've given him social status, touch that stuff and he'll curse you. In other words, his faith is only as deep as the material blessings that he has in his life. And the book of Job is a long book because it's Job arguing back and forth with his friends and so forth. But at the end of it, who was right about Job? Satan, the cynic, was not just not nice, he was wrong. He'd misunderstood Job and Job's faith, and also misunderstood God. So you have through the Bible these two sides that I think resonate with any of us who are honest about human nature. The great irony here is that it takes, as I've tried to say, near omniscience to actually warrant cynicism, to justify cynicism. But God, who really is omniscient, turns out to not be a cynic. Now, this ought to give us pause, I think. The parable of the Prodigal Son is an intriguing example because it's a great example of a place where you could easily imagine the father of this son who's gone away and blown half the family fortune and shamed the family name, the father dressing him down with a cynical perspective, with cynical anger. And yet, that's not what you get in the father of the prodigal son, who represents God the Father. The younger son comes home broke and starving. A cynical father could have said, you probably planned this from the beginning. You knew that you could always come back. You're not repentant, you're just hungry. And yet, what did the father actually do in the parable Jesus told? He ran down the road to meet his son. He grabbed him and hugged him. He brought him back, and he had a banquet and refused to accept his resignation from the family, reinstated him in the family. This is God, who the omniscient God, who knows all, who can see through everybody as through glass. This is how he treats his child. Or the older brother, a cynical father might have said to him, here you are whining and moaning about your brother's party. It's only because you were only resented because you never had the courage to go away and see the world. It's only your sour grapes. Well, that's not what this father said either. This father said was expressed sadness that the older brother was cynical about the younger brother, but basically ended the conversation saying, "I'm leaving the door open to the banquet. Anytime you decide to come and change your mind and join the banquet, you'll be welcome there." So this story is a setup for cynicism, someone in the God role. But while it takes omniscience to justify cynicism, God, who alone has the epistemological equipment to be a cynic, is not a cynic. He is not blind to human corruption, certainly in this world. He sees human corruption far better than any of us see human corruption. But his salvation is designed for corrupt people and bent people like us. And he's not finished with us. He has a rescue plan for us, but he has a plan for us once rescued to grow and to grow against those flaws in ourselves. So as with the older brother, cynicism can effectively blind us to much that's good or potentially good in the world. I want to stretch your tolerance here for a minute by misquoting Nietzsche for you. Now, first I'll quote him properly, and then I'll misquote him. This is from the Twilight of the Idols. When it is trodden on, a worm will curl up. That is prudent. It thereby reduces the chance of being trodden on again. In the language of morals, humility. Now, that's a complete misunderstanding of humility, or at least a Christian view of humility. But forget that for now. I don't have time to unpack that. I'm just going to retell this, substituting cynicism for the word humility. When it is trodden on, a worm will curl up. That is prudent. It thereby reduces the chance of being trodden on again. In the language of morals, cynicism. Now, this becomes something that's closer to the truth. Cynicism is a curling up of the soul in self-protection, away from the danger of disappointment and disillusionment, away from possible pain and challenge, but also away from everything that is bright and good and beautiful in life and in the world as well. And so this is the cost that we involve ourselves in as we give ourselves to cynicism. But how do we guide our suspicion to stay away from it, to have suspicion but to not have cynicism? I want to read you an interesting example from a dinner party in the recorded by John in John's Gospel, because he gives interesting alternatives as to how we see these things. This is in John 12, verse 3 and following. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone. She bought it so she might keep it for the day of my burial." Now, this is an intriguing little paragraph to me, because Mary does an extraordinary thing. I mean, a really extraordinary thing. This is a lot of money. Most people would say this is somewhere near a whole year's wages for an average worker in Palestine at the time. Mary does this extraordinary thing and needs some sort of an explanation. And Judas is there quickly with an explanation, a cynical explanation. He could see through Mary, would unmask her, and he exposed her basically as someone who was flaky and irresponsible and had no care for the poor, no compassion. And to say, what is she doing? How much better if she would contribute. John, as the narrator, saw through and unmasked Judas' cynicism. This is suspicion going backward. In other words, the cynic isn't immune from cynical or from suspicious judgment. He reversed the flow of Judas' cynicism back and unmasked Judas, and showed that he wasn't concerned for the poor at all. He had just lost a windfall. He had lost a huge amount of money that he would have taken from the money bag that he kept for the whole group. So you have cynicism, and cynicism itself unmasked. And then Jesus weighs in, and he, who could actually see through Mary in a way Judas couldn't. He could see through Mary, but he could not unmask her because she wasn't wearing a mask. He took her at face value because face value was the same she was all the way through. And you have this beautiful picture of Jesus just completely wiping away the cynicism of Judas, and also looking to Mary. It's possible for human beings to have real, sincere, extraordinary, abnormal commitments, and they're right, and they're good, and they're glorious. And we know that he says she was about the only one who knew what was going on then, who knew that Jesus would need a burial within not many hours. So we sometimes have to see through and unmask people because what they're doing is desperately false and wrong and mistaken. We sometimes have to do that. But sometimes we also have to say, yes, this person is the same all the way through, and take people at face value. We also sometimes have to say we're not sure, or we don't have to say that, but we're in the middle, and we need to wait to know more. The best guidelines for practice, I would put in 3 words: humility, individuality, and charity. We can pick this up in discussion if we want, because I don't have time to develop each of those. But the humility to admit that what we don't know, the humility to admit that we're not omniscient, that we don't have X-ray vision, the individuality to see people as individuals, not as members of groups. I mean, racism is, for example, itself totally cynical because it doesn't see individual people. It sees groups of people, or any way of grouping: race, class, age, sex, and can refuse to see individuals. And lastly, charity. We are called to love people. And for example, if we do have to unmask someone, we should not enjoy it. It should not make our day. It should be something we feel pressured to do by the extremity of the situation and the need for the truth to be known. Humility, individuality, charity are 3 very good words to meditate on, to think of how do we use our suspicion where we need to, but not let it run away with us. So, including this here, I've tried to show that cynicism's claim to honesty can be questioned, as well as its ability to guide us to what is true and good. In each of the 3 theaters, an individual people, just think for a minute about times when someone has seen and tried to unmask you, and they were wrong. They were completely mistaken. They misunderstood you and got it completely wrong. It's very easy to do, especially if you're angry, especially in a tight situation where you've got a lot of emotional force vectors flying around. Cynicism about institutions produces a great false sense of hopelessness. Great danger for us, I think, today with our government in its present state. But not just government, but marriages sometimes have been in terrible condition, but have improved. So have churches been in terrible shape, but have sometimes improved. Schools, corporations, even nations. Some people have said that history is the best argument against cynicism. It depends on the historian, but I think there's real truth in that as well. I like to think of as a sort of thought experiment. Imagine you were alive in the mid 1980s, back in the Cold War era. What would you have thought? And say, standing in the Harvard Yard in the 1980s, if someone had, say, the mid 1980s, and someone had stood up and predicted that within 5 years the Iron Curtain will fall without a world war, and that South Africa would be led by a black man after a peaceful transition of power. Within 5 years, both these things will be true. I mean, I would have thought this person was absolutely crazy if I'd been there listening to him or her. there would be no,
The numbers aren't the best.
there would be no sense that this is a realistic possibility. And yet, what happened? And what happened, I don't have time to develop this at all, obviously, but what happened was because an awful lot of people resisted the temptation to be cynical and kept working for change, kept working against ridiculous odds. Think of the working against apartheid in South Africa. Think of the work against the Iron Curtain standing. I think of the work of Martin Luther King Jr. Imagine the temptations for cynicism he would have had of giving up, saying, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It can't be done. Finally, and most importantly, cynicism about God. And again, the message of the Bible is not that we live in a God-forsaken world, but in a world for which God forsook his Son out of love for us. And that, as he did willingly, and giving his Son and the Son willingly going. He has seen all the evil in the world better than any of us can, and he's that evil is put on the back of Jesus Christ out of love for us. While the cynic will sometimes be right about specific people and specific issues, we don't know enough to adopt cynicism as an attitude in any of these areas, individuals, institutions, and with God. God, who does know enough, because he alone has the epistemic equipment to be a cynic, to be omniscient, is not a cynic. And I would just end by thanking God that he is not a cynic to us, to any one of us, as we come to him in faith. And I will stop there and turn it over to some of you who have any questions you'd want to raise. I'd be happy to go with you as long as you have time. So.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Dick, for just this amazing talk. And it's great to see you again. I was here at your talk last year when we were meeting.
Good. Great. Good to see your face too.
Yeah, it's great to see you. We do have a question from Jeff Todd. He chatted to me. Here's a question. What are the implications of taking people at face value for what they say rather than cynically reading into the underlying message of their motivation?
Well, it depends, of course, whether that taking them at face value is a wise and accurate judgment. Sometimes we take people at face value when we know perfectly well we shouldn't, because we're scared to confront them. So it's fear of conflict or whatever that makes us unwilling to confront them. And that's of course is not a good thing. Jesus saw Mary at face value because he could see who she was and where she was. I think we should start assuming that we can take people at face value and need good reason to not do so. It's the one of the fascinating things is that, as I said, one of the third ways of limiting our suspicion is charity or love. There's a wonderful verse in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 7. It says, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Now, those are really interesting words. Love stretches us to believe and hope in in who they are and their potential to change. So it stretches you beyond what you know. But the other two words that are on either side of it, love bears and endures. Those are words of how you deal with disappointment. So it doesn't say that if you love people, it will always come out the way you hope it will. But love includes all of that. Love includes the hoping and believing in people, but also in the endurance of the failing of your hopes, of your hope collapsing, and you enduring your disappointment, your disillusionment with them. So this means that love is not just lots of nice feelings, but it's a huge commitment to their well-being and a willingness to put up flack for them, willingness to be disappointed by them. So obviously, love is to stretch us, to challenge us in that way, but it isn't to make us just be a victim of every con artist that comes along. I mean, we're meant to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. It's another thing that the wise as serpents. What does that mean? It means that suspicion is still at work. It's a hard. I could go on, I'm afraid, for too long on this one because it's such a rich, has potential for. But I hope you can get a picture of that. That there's risk in taking things at face value, but the more we get to know a person in the situation, the more we can tell whether our trust in them is valid or not.
Right. Thank you so much for the response, Dick. I have another question that just came in from Megan, and it's, what are some criteria by which we can judge when belief in sincerity or suspicion is the right choice? With our own limited knowledge and fallibility, especially when we have the responsibility of leading others beyond ourselves, and then implying that the wrong choice has implications beyond our own personal disappointment.
That's much too good a question to give as short an answer to as I'll have to give. One thing I would want to start with is I can't give the same answer to every person to that question, because who you are is important. In other words, for some people, they never had it so good if they get a chance to unmask someone, to confront someone with the truth about who they are. It'll be a gotcha occasion, and they never had it. It makes their day. For somebody else, they may be terrified of ever saying anything that would be a challenge or a questioning of someone else's integrity. They would say, I don't do that. I've had someone saying, I don't do rebuke. And that's someone saying, I don't obey God. I mean, because God says we need to sometimes rebuke people. And so to start with, a lot depends on your self-knowledge to get at this, of what sort of a person are you? And it's totally right that what you do has all sorts of implications way beyond yourself, of the people who trust you, if you're in leadership. And I don't have any packaged advice apart from know yourself, know your dangers. What is the occupational hazard of being you? And in terms of, are you, is it too easy for you to wade in and rebuke someone and unmask someone? Is it too easy to you? And you tend to do it not out of love, but out of ego? Or is it the other side? Are you too afraid of doing it? That'll make a huge difference. But in each place, these three variables of humility: what do I really know? How much do I know? How much can I know more if I need to know more? And how much am I taking this person as a single person, not just as a member of a group or of any sort, race, class, location, age, sex, generalizing. And then, am I dealing with them in charity? Am I dealing with them in love? And then we have to, God has entrusted us to go ahead with our best judgment and pray throughout for those things, for humility, for individuality, for charity, because goodness knows you read that chapter on love, and we need God's help at every stage of it.
That's great.
So,
and
again, I could go on, but I could.
Yeah, I think the next question perhaps will allow you to flesh this out more, because it's more directly personal. Next question I have is, how might we help friends that have struggled with cynicism in their faith? How have you, in your own personal experiences, walked alongside friends who are in this place? And what are things that you've done that have been helpful, and what haven't been?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one too, because it raises cynicism among Christians, as opposed to, I got into it first of all as an issue of apologetics, because cynicism is a reason to reject the faith entirely and never think about it again. But here you raise very properly the fact that Christians can be cynical. I've lectured all over the place on cynicism, and I've asked people, particularly in Christian groups and universities and so on, do you find that Christian people, or who do you find is most cynical, Christian people or non-Christian people? And many times they will say the Christian people are most cynical. And that baffles me in one way, but in another way, not. We believe in the fall, we believe in sin, we believe in human unintegrity, but I think there's also, Christians can be self-protective in their cynicism. I have personally tried to, first of all, not come up with a quick answer, but to listen to their cynicism and to listen to ask them to spell it out and to draw them out as much as I can, not just about cynicism, about anything. I think we're too quick to answer, too quick to find a Christian answer that will jump in and answer it quickly. We need to spend much more time talking and listening. So what are they cynical about? Where is it? Is it legitimate at all or not? I think oftentimes with Christians it is self-protective. I, as I said in the talk here, I tend to ask people, how do you know that? How do you know what you just said? How do you know the things that you will say, or say, you hear so often ridiculous generalizations of, well, men are like this or women are like that. I think, whoa, wait a minute, what are we talking about? Are you really an essentialist and have an idea of maleness and femaleness? And think, no, I don't have that worked out. But to get them to spin out more fully, give them more rope in a way to expose their cynicism and where it comes from, because oftentimes cynicism is just our expression of how we behave in our group. As I said, I gave an example. Sometimes it comes from the sense of humor of the people we hang out with, and with them we come up with things that aren't well thought out, but are nonetheless destructive, and we contribute to conversations in a destructive way, not because we thought carefully what we're saying, but because we fit into the flow of the conversation. So to really, I think to challenge people, how do we know that? And it's interesting to look at again in the scriptures and see how God Himself is not cynical. How cynical we would be with the two boys in the two sons in the Prodigal Son parable, and how much it's just not true. Anyway, that's a take on it. But here, I would say for someone that's stuck in cynicism, sit down and try and get them to spell out more where they're coming from, how they know these things to be true, and to expound more on where that cynicism comes from.
That's great. Thank you, Dick. I know it's already 12 o'clock, but I have just one more question left that someone asked me. So I think this can perhaps just be the last one to consider. So this person says, I think many might consider me cynical. However, I think that I'm an optimist so far as I'm often willing to ask the hard questions to the important people. I become cynical when the answers to my questions reflect poorly on the people and institutions that I interact with. Should I stop asking questions or find other methods of appearing favorable and optimistic in order to be taken seriously and not just seen as a pessimist?
Yeah, remember my distinction between suspicion and cynicism. What I hear you saying about what you do is I'm suspicious of something poorly worked out, poorly thought through, poorly developed, or whatever it is. And I want to be able to say something about that. That is not cynicism. It's cynicism that says that person never works anything out properly. This person is hopeless. You can never trust them in anything they do. That's the cynicism, the cynical voice, and you shouldn't even be thinking that, let alone saying it. But there's a kind of, I think, well, another time, another year, if Finney invites me to come in and talk again, I might talk about sentimentality as a problem of apologetics, because there's too much sentimentality in the Christian world that objects to questions being asked because, oh my goodness, it upsets the apple cart a little bit. It makes people's pulse go up, and oh, we mustn't have that because we love each other and we keep smiling. Because being a Christian means keeping smiling and keeping everybody happy. That's ridiculous. What would poor Jeremiah have done in that sort of an environment? He would be rejected and sent home. There must be plenty of room with love and with kindness, suggesting, listen, this needs to be worked through in a different way. But that's suspicion, not cynicism. So I would say carry on with suspicion, and maybe even if a Christian group demands optimism all the time, that is what I begin to call sentimentality. Biblical writers didn't demand optimism all the time. They confronted things head on. Jesus certainly did not exude optimism in every interaction with people. And so there may be a way of challenging the kind of environment that we're hearing about there, that objects to the demands and optimism of people. That means, I don't want you to ruffle my feathers. I want to be happy. I started out happy today. I want to end the day happy. That's not Christian. That's sentimentality, which refuses to admit evil, refuses to retreat. It ends up retreating in yourself. But I don't want to try and give another lecture on sentimentality here. but some Christian, I mean, this guy, I don't know if you're familiar with this guy, Jeremy Begbie, who's done more about Christianity and the arts than almost anyone in the recent generation. But he thinks sentimentality is one of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problem, that evangelical Christianity faces today. Just something for us to take home. The sentimentality that can surround us can be really against the kingdom of God in its final, its impact. So I've got more time. I'm happy to end the formal meeting, but if anyone wants to stay on, I'm happy to stay on. But I think you probably need to end the meeting to have people sign up if they want to.
Yeah. So right now we'll just end officially. If anyone has burning questions, feel free to just ask personally on this call. And then Dick, whenever you need to leave, just feel free to just say it, and we'll cut it off.
Okay.
Hi, Dick. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Tuan.
Oh, hey, Dick. I'm Tuan. I just want to kind of like get your thoughts on kind of like when we assess if something is like cynicism, because there's some like element of subjectivity to it, right? Like where like maybe if we are less aware of what is causing that person to be distressed or to have that reaction, then I'll probably like fall more on the side of like, oh, this person is a little bit like cynical about it, about a situation, as opposed to like being more realistic. And so how do you think about balancing that, right? And specifically, I guess, think about, let's say, like when you brought out like historical reasons why, like, yeah, we don't have to be all cynical all the time, but you think about even like MLK or like Mandela and everything, like those examples, like there are plenty of reasons to be cynical, and at that time, right? So like, how do you encourage people not to be cynical while like not appearing tone deaf?
Yes. That's really hard, because a lot of people gave themselves just as sincerely as MLK did and died without seeing any of it happen. And think of the people who died with, it's the same with Mandela, the same certainly with the 75 years of communism in the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Well, that's not 75 in Eastern Europe, but this is where the Christian faith, I think, has a way of seeing that we live not just in the story that we can see happening around ourselves. We live as part of a bigger story. We live as people who are aware of the real kingdom is the kingdom of God. Our real citizenship is not the United States of America, but is the kingdom of God. Even the United States of America, my pastor used the term United States of America, and then he said, "I'm speaking aspirationally," meaning the united word is, as I say, United States. That's an aspiration that it would become something beyond what it is today in our divisions. So I think the main thing is to be perhaps much more aware than we are of the bigness of the picture, the bigness of the narrative way beyond us. I think I heard a guy give a lecture on Martin Luther once, and at the end of his life, he had no idea what he'd actually accomplished in the Protestant Reformation. He was quite discouraged. He thought he wasted his time. He thought that what had come had been really not very important, whereas in fact it was hugely important as a reform of the church and as starting the whole church. So what we can see, again, it's part of our humility to be able to admit our field of vision. I mean, I like to think of, you're sitting in a room now, I think. I can see a wall behind you. You have no idea what's going on the other side of that wall, or the wall to the right of you or the left of you, because you're limited. You're in one spot. That is your finitude you're experiencing, and that your awareness of that finitude is going to be very helpful to you as you face all of life. You're a complete, your ignorance of the future. We're all future blind. And so our humility has to be both the two factors I think that we need to focus on. One, our finitude, but also on our sin, the reality of our sin. We can distort what we know. So our vision of what we see may be distorted not just by being finite, but by a warped understanding because of sin. And so that means we back off and say, Lord, you're running this show. I must say, I went through a lot of agony just in this last couple of weeks over this last election. I care deeply what happened in this election. And by the way, happy with what happened so far on this election. But to me, it's not as if the future of America is the end of the story. And even if America goes in some totally in a direction that I would dread and hate, that doesn't mean the kingdom of God is over. Otherwise we're stuck in American nationalism, which is an idolatry. So I guess my answer is build a fire under our awareness of the size of the narrative, the big game that we're actually involved in, and try and increase our awareness of that. And reading history is a great way to do that. Reading battles from other places going on today. I don't know. I could go on too long. I'll leave it at that. Does that get at what you're saying at all? Or?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you so much, Dick.
Yeah, this is Finney. I had to switch to phone to make a lunch appointment here, but I want to ask a question to you, Dick, about your definition there, where you had said that cynicism was an overconfident suspicion. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I tend to think about the world, this topic, I should say, from the perspective often of virtue ethics. It's Aristotle's idea where there's a virtue that can go to an unhealthy extreme. So take courage, that's a good virtue, but if it's too much, it can be foolhardy or rash.
Yeah.
Too little, it's timidity. And so if we think about casting cynicism on that axis there, what is it suspicion is the good virtue, and then is it sentimentalism that's the lack or the deficiency? Could you just unpack that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. That's something I would like some time to think about, how I would try and frame that out, because it's asking for a sort of structural thing. I see cynicism and sentimentality as sort of opposite poles, but not just equal opposites. They both function differently, is what I guess I'm trying to say. But they're the people that hate each other, or even if sentimentalists can hate, I think they can. And I hate to say we need a balance somewhere between cynicism and sentimentality, because that means we are in danger of choosing the worst out of, or just the best out of two bad things. I think, I guess I would want to see wisdom. I think suspicion is part of wisdom. I'd want to say I don't think I'd want to say suspicion is is standalone a whole virtue. I think Aristotle would probably have agreed, and certainly more recent virtue ethics people would have. The wisdom includes suspicion. We question, just like the prior thing. I get put down for lack of optimism if I ask questions. It's wisdom that includes suspicion, and if we go, as you said, if we go too far in that, we go away, we become unwise, and we hit cynicism as we abandon wisdom, but in going in that direction of looking critically, a critical analysis or evaluative function that wisdom has. Wisdom is teaching, the Lady Wisdom in Proverbs is giving you tools to go to work, to not get cons, to not get drawn into crazy things, and to watch out for the fool, to be suspicious of the fool, because the fool is someone who isn't just stupid, but who is looked up to, but is lacking humility before God and neighbor, and so watch out. Don't get sucked into folly. So I see, I guess, as wisdom and suspicion being part of that. The opposite would be, here again, sentimentality is a tricky thing. It is because it includes, I think, three, a number of different things. It doesn't see evil. It doesn't admit that to be evil to being there, or really complexity, and it tends to be self-reflective, or rather, I become, as I become sentimental, I'm aware, and my awareness is limited by awareness of myself and how I feel about each thing that comes along, and it's dominated by self-understanding and self-sensitivity, and then sentimentality is never expressed. What it feels strongly about is never expressed in concrete action. It just ends with feeling, the feeling of the thing itself. I think of the James passage about when the poor man, or if someone is poor and needs help, if someone just says, be fed, be happy, everything's okay, and then going away and not doing anything, that is the sentimentalist. You're pleased with your own feelings of happiness because of the reality of compassion in this world, I guess, but you go away without ever delivering it. So sentimentality has a structure to it, but I'm not sure I can quite fill in Aristotle's requirement there. But I might take some more time to do it. I think faith is there in the center of it all, and faith must have wisdom to evaluate. But faith must also have hope attached to it. Part of faith is hope, is a view of the future, and the sort of love that I mentioned before, the believing all things, hoping all things, bearing all things, enduring all things, is a very tough love looking into the future. So I'll leave it at that and think about it some more and come back to you maybe. Does that get it to anybody what you're saying, Finney, or not?
Yeah, no, it does, and I like it's a fascinating topic, I think, for so many reasons, because like you said, you made a number of very intriguing comments that cynicism can cohabit along with other worldviews and religions. It's sort of almost like a parasite when you describe
Definitely.
it in that way.
Definitely.
And that which resonates, that makes a lot of sense. And then you also pointed out that there's a God in his omniscience who can see all things is not cynical. We agree with that, and it seems like cynicism has elements of pride in it and denying hope. It's this fascinating vortex of a lot of different aspects of the worst of us, I suppose, that come together there in subtle ways to make something that we all recognize, but it's not the easiest thing to wrap our minds around there. But I'm fascinating.
No, and we'll never get to the end of it, I think. And there's different ways it morphs as society changes and as relationships change. I think it can morph, and we get to see different sides of it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Very welcome. Very welcome.
We have a question from Timothy. He's raising his hand.
Yes.
Yeah. I really appreciate this talk. It was really helpful for me. I think one of the things that was useful to kind of parse out this idea was the three theaters of cynicism. And I had never quite thought about things that way. My question really gets to like cynicism or hope in like institutions, particularly the state as a big area of focus right now. And I think a lot of our minds. And I think my question has to do with like, if you're not cynical towards the state, for instance, then what are you? Like, what is the Christian hope towards the state? Because if I think about cynicism towards God, that's, if I assume I know who God is and that he's not capable of helping me, obviously that's contrary to what we're taught and to who he's revealed himself to be. If I'm cynical about people, then I'm not looking at people like Jesus did. He actually believed people could turn to him. But I think what is the hope of what the state can accomplish? Like, what's the hope of? And I think that's because it seems like if you're not going to be cynical, there's different gradations. The response to cynicism is going to differ depending on the theater, and I think I'm struggling to understand like what's the response to cynicism in like institutions, whether it's the state or whether it's, we can mention marriage or whatever it might be.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, isn't it? Of what kind of there needs to be hope, I think, and people have faced ridiculously different settings that they find themselves in. Christian people have been under monarchies, they've been under anarchy, they've been under all sorts of dictatorships, oligarchies, and so on, democracies of all stripes, I think what's tricky is to say that there's a certain thing that we should all hope for. Certainly, biblically, the role of the state is in Romans 13. There's quite a lot on what is meant to establish and enforce justice and honesty and fairness in the civic realm, and that we should hope for, that we should be willing to work toward. But what working towards it and hoping towards it means in different settings is very different. What is realistic to work for, and so that would what you yourself hope for or work toward would depend on where you are, and of course it would have everything to do with your vocation and what God has called you to do. I mean, in the history of the world, in Christian history, most Christians have wouldn't even ask this question in terms of having any realistic input into what goes on in the state, because they are powerless within it, and so their area of influence is much narrower. What has been much narrower. We in an open democracy as much as ours have extraordinary possibilities still, I think, for what can be done. But in terms of an overall picture, we I think need to reject nationalism, reject making the state sacred and so important to us that everything rises and falls on what happens to my nation or my party, even within the nation. It's never beyond criticism from God's side, so we mustn't look to it as something where it sort of has a preciousness that makes us unwilling to ever criticize it. I believe, though, in patriotism, which is a proper gratitude for what we receive from a nation and from what a nation has done and is continuing to do to establish justice and maintain justice and fairness and righteousness in the land, freedom. So how do we hold all those things together? I think it will depend a lot on just what your calling is, what the level of your own political involvement is, and what you can hope for. But a big thing is, what can I realistically hope for? And I think there's an enormous amount that we can realistically hope for in America today. And it would be cynicism to just brush it aside. It would be realism to say, I'm not going to get everything I want. All the things I'd like to see happen are not going to happen. I mean, I feel, as many of us do, I think, in a sense, politically homeless. I'm a registered Republican, but I've not voted Republican all the time at all. I am pro-life, but I'm also pro-environment and pro-environmental care. And that means I don't fit anywhere in the two-party system. So I've got to back off my hopes and make them more realistic, but do what I can. And that isn't very much, but it's something, and I'll continue to do it. But I think it's good to figure what our possibilities are personally, and go forward with it. There's are you familiar with this group called the AND campaign?
Yeah, we just had Justin Gaboni.
I recommend his book and his message. If you heard him this last week or whatever it was, I heard his talk, and he's got, I think, a very good perspective on this for someone who's called to get involved in it full time. But I would trust, he had, I think, a lot of very good things to say into that sort of a question.
Great, thank you. This is what was it? Ant campaign?
And campaign. Maybe someone can sort you out. He's a really interesting guy who's determined to resist polarization. So he takes a whack at the right, then he takes a whack at the left before he goes on to the next topic, and roots it biblically from a Christian viewpoint. I think he's got a lot of a really good way of, because otherwise, if we don't, Francis Schaeffer, who started L'Abri, had an interesting way of putting it. He says we must be co-belligerents on all sorts of causes, but without pretending we need to be allies with the people in that cause. In other words, as Christians, we need to think issue by issue, not just embrace packages. And the two-party system presses you to join the package. Now, there's a certain amount of leeway within each party, but not as much as there maybe ought to be. I'd like to see more pro-life in the Democratic Party and more pro-environment in the Republican Party, for example. But he does a very nice job showing how he goes about that and has gone about it and how we could. So it's Justin Giboney is his name, and he's well, get the information, pass the information around, because his talk is still I think available online.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful.
Anything else would anyone want to run with? Because I've still got a minute.
I guess if no other question, I'll ask the last one.
Okay.
A
chairman's prerogative.
Well, since you still have, you said you still have like a minute.
No, I've got more than a minute.
Okay. I'm curious if you can. So you mentioned this in the very beginning of your talk, and my question is, why is it important to distinguish between pessimism and cynicism? And earlier you mentioned that cynicism is a more focused pessimism, but later there was an emphasis on cynicism encompassing the totality of thinking. So I guess I'm still confused between the difference between cynicism and pessimism, and would appreciate a clarification.
Yeah, I meant cynicism is a totalizing thing, not that it necessarily sees through everything all at once. I tried to focus cynicism. It sees through individuals and then totalizes that vision through individuals. Like the Doonesbury thing, I says that to be a cynic, you'd have to say that all politicians were like you. Now that means it could be just cynical about politicians, and the rest of us are upright people. It's politicians who are corrupt and a bunch of bums, and that is cynicism. And all politicians, that would be the role of cynicism, or the function of cynicism as a totalizing thing. But cynicism, an important point is that the cynic who's cynical about politicians isn't necessarily cynical about God or about every individual, or even about is probably pretty cynical about government, because I mean it's hard to be hopeful about government with that and cynical about all politicians. But the cynicism is a more narrow focus thing. With pessimism is just as I said, Murphy's law. Things will go wrong. What goes wrong will go wrong. What could go wrong will go wrong, and that just everything is going badly, and there's no real hope that's justified, and in a way, the cynicism is more pointed. It's sort of a rifle rather than a shotgun kind of thing, even though it's very total in that one area where it hits. Cynicism about whatever it is, cynicism about say church leaders or something like that. It could be very, very negative about church leaders. and see through them all and explain to you how to see through them all and instruct you in your cynicism as to how to do it. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's no one in the church who has integrity. The pessimist might just say that no one has integrity, and that's all. So, yeah, does that get you what you're saying? I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry, I accidentally muted. I'm having issues. I don't know why you're muted.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Well, I was.
Yeah, no, that's great. So the way I understand it is that, and correct me if I'm wrong. So in this sense, pessimism is essentially cynicism to the extreme, right? Where you just view everything as through that way.
Well, I think, but pessimism is just that the worst things happen. Cynicism is more focused toward people's motivations and their intentions for what they're doing are corrupt. The actual motivation of an institution is corrupt, and it's not what it appears to be. So it's looking through a positive appearance, a positive exterior, all sorts of respectability, and seeing beneath it, I can see that it's corrupt. So cynicism has an unmasking dynamic to it. Pessimism is everything that can go wrong will go wrong, and everything is that you hope in will always backfire on you some way. So it isn't necessarily unmasking of people or institutions, but it's reality. It's all of reality is pitted against us.
Okay, I see.
It's going to disappoint us. So, and again, that's just how I've used it. I think that's probably more or less common, but if you look up in a good dictionary, you may find some more helpful distinctions to make there. But cynicism is actually it is sometimes used in a when someone does something that's overtly to make money or out of greed. People will say his motivations are cynical. Now that's using cynicism in a little bit different way than I am using it. That's saying it's cynicism to just be a synonym with corruption, or his motivations are corrupt. And that's how it's used in a popular way, but I don't think that's the best either dictionary definition or useful definition, because it means something more specific than corruption. It may be corruption in a certain way, but it's used of politicians. That was cynical. That decision, that backing this person at this time or having nothing to say was a cynical move. But that's really, and what they mean is it's corrupt. They're motivated by really impure motivations, totally self-interested, and they're wrong. But that's just how you're liable to hear it out in the world, rather than how I've tried to define it a little bit more specifically.
Okay.
So you need to get pessimism, corruption, and cynicism all in order.
No,
and watch out for them all.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're already past 12:30, so I think we'll just break for now.
Okay, you've been very patient, all of you. So God be with you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Right. Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.